On today's program, in honor of Hanukkah, we have special messages from Canada Celebrates Israel Network of Jews and Christians National Director, Reverend Giulio Gabeli, and Marty Shoub of Tikkun International, a global Messianic family dedicated to the restoration of the Church and Israel. And we visit Capernaum to learn the significance of the Menorah. The very first Hanukkah celebration, also known as the Festival of Lights or Feast of Dedication, took place some 160 years before Christ. Israel was overrun by the evil Seleucid Antioch Epiphanes, who sacrificed pigs to the statue of Zeus in the temple in Jerusalem. After a great struggle, which raged for 3.5 years, he was finally defeated by the Hasmoneans and by Judas Maccabeus in particular. The temple was cleansed and rededicated with a miracle that kept the menorah burning for 8 days until pure olive oil that could only be obtained from the Galilee was able to replenish it. The reality was that they only had sufficient oil for 1 day. Jesus celebrated this miracle and thereby recognized the intervention of God on behalf of Israel. We read in John chapter 10, verses 22 through 23, "Now it was the feast of dedication in Jerusalem, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch." Hanukkah celebrates the rededication of the Second Temple in Jerusalem and the miracle of 1 day supply of oil being extended to last 8 days. For this reason, the special Hanukkah menorah, or otherwise known as the Hanukkiah with 9 branches, is used rather than the typical 7-branch menorah. One candle branch is typically placed above or below the others, called the shamash, in Hebrew meaning attendant or servant. This candle is then used to light the other 8 candles, and each night, along with a blessing and prayer, 1 additional candle is lit by the shamash until all 8 candles are lit together on the final night of a holiday. Other Hanukkah festivals include playing dreidel and eating oil-based foods such as donuts or latkes, which is shredded fried potatoes. Isaiah chapter 60, verses 1 through 3 says, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising." John chapter 10, verse 12. Yeshua said, "I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life."
Up here you can see the Jewish menorah, the Jewish candelabra. How many branches do we see there? How many? 7, that's correct. Now I'm taking out my ID, my blue ID, and I want to show you the emblem of the State of Israel, the way it appears on my documents. The menorah is not standing on 3 legs like it is here.
Yeah.
It is exactly the way you can see it on Titus Art in Rome, because that's the last time that it was seen. We don't know where it is now. So which is the right one? This design or this design? I'll tell you, we didn't know anything better than this when the State of Israel started and we needed an emblem. But there is a place in the Jewish quarter in Jerusalem where it was excavated, and they have discovered there the apartments of the priests. And on the wall, one of the children probably that went to visit Daddy at work in the temple drew a candelabra that looks like that. So probably this is the right shape. As long as we had a temple, we were lighting the candelabra with pure olive oil. When Judah the Maccabee is conquering the country from the Greeks, and he knows that the temple was disgraced, the first thing that he does, he goes inside, purifies everything, and he's looking for oil to light the menorah, the candelabra. And he sees a little jar of oil, and he didn't think it would last for so many days, but it lasted for 8 days. Symbolic number.
Yes, it is.
Ever since we lost the temple, we are never lighting this candelabra of 7 candles. But what you can see Jews doing, in Hanukka, they use a different one with 9 branches. 1 branch is the service candle, the other 8 are for the miracle. So we are using 9 branches menorah to commemorate the miracle that happened to the 7 branches menorah. That's why when you go to see those candelabras in the shop, you see sometimes 7, sometimes 9, and you don't know why. So that's a very genius idea, using this one to commemorate a miracle that happened to the one in the temple.
Zechariah chapter 3, verses 6 through 10. The angel of the Lord gave this charge to Joshua. This is what the Lord Almighty says. If you will walk in obedience to me and keep my requirements, then you will govern my house and have charge of my courts, and I will give you a place among these standing here. Listen, High Priest Joshua, you and your associates seated before you, who are men symbolic of things to come, I am going to bring my servant the branch. See the stone I have set in front of Joshua? There are 7 eyes on that stone, and I will engrave an inscription on it, says the Lord. I will remove the sin of this land in a single day. In that day, each of you will invite your neighbors to sit under your vine and fig tree, declares the Lord Almighty.
I'd like to speak to you about a very significant time, a very significant festival, known as the Festival of Lights, but the Hebrew word is the Festival of Hanukka. Generally speaking, it's celebrated almost parallel with the Christmas celebration in the month of December, according to the Gregorian calendar. Now, the Feast of Hanukka is not mentioned in Leviticus chapter 23. In other words, the different festivals that were mentioned and commanded by God when God said, "These are my designated times." But the Feast of Hanukka is a celebration that Jesus, Yeshua himself, observed. You see, the Bible says in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 22 and 23, says, "Then came Hanukka in Yerushalayim. It was winter, and Yeshua was walking around inside the temple area in Shlomo's colonnade, or Solomon's colonnade." So you see, the Bible clearly says that during the time of Jesus, the first century, that the Jewish people were celebrating a festival called Hanukka, or during the time of winter, it was a festival that was actually referred to as the Festival of Dedication, but we understand it as the Festival of Lights. Now, why is this so important? Now, I'm going to read from my book, Grafted In, because I wrote it down so succinctly and concisely, and I think it's important that I share with you the story of Hanukka, why it is so significant. You see, during this time, the Greek Empire, under Alexander the Great, succeeded in establishing Hellenism through the conquest of the known world. Now, during the time of Jesus, or prior to Jesus' coming onto the world scene, was what we know as the intertestamental period. The time of the ending of the first covenant, and then the new covenant, as we read from the Gospel of Matthew. After the untimely death of Alexander, the empire was divided into 4 quarters governed by 4 generals. the Ptolemies took control of the south, the Seleucids took control of the north, and eventually the Seleucids took control of Judea under the rulership of Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus IV, who adopted the title of Epiphanes, which literally means God manifest. In other words, Antiochus wanted to be worshipped as a god. Conflicts and crisis then began to emerge for devout Jews who refused to be assimilated into the culture of Hellenism. Antiochus viewed this refusal as a rebellion, and not surprisingly, he began to enforce the policy of assimilation. In fact, an ultimatum was given to the Jews: either give up your distinctive observances of Shabbat, kosher laws, circumcision, or face death. You see, the Syrians under Antiochus marched in and defiled even the golden menorah, the utensils and the altars, and everything that was sacred to the Jewish people. Can you imagine that historians tell us that Antiochus even ordered a pig, the greatest desecration to the Jewish mind, ordered that a pig be sacrificed on the holy altar, and erected a statue of the Greek god Zeus in the temple, which obviously provoked the Jews beyond pacifism into outright confrontation. It was a turbulent time of uncertainty and trouble for the Jewish people. Now, in the midst of all this trouble, a godly priest named Mattathias lived in the small village of Modi'in, and he had 5 sons. The Syrian soldiers were about to erect an idol and then force the inhabitants of Modi'in, the Jews, to eat pork and thus desecrate them once and for all. This provocation was the last straw, fueling a revolt led by the oldest son, Judah, which was nicknamed Maccabee, which means Judah the Hammer. Eventually, the impossible happened. The Maccabees forced the Syrians out of Israel, recapturing Jerusalem as well. And then came the task of cleansing the temple that had been so desecrated by the Syrians. The altars were cleansed, as well as the utensils, and especially the menorah. However, only 1 day's worth of purified oil was found to light the menorah, and it would take 8 days to prepare more oil. The following miracle is the reason Hanukka is celebrated for 8 days. You see, the oil supernaturally lasted for 8 days to keep the light of God burning until more oil was available. And thus the temple was restored to its full function and rededicated to God of Israel. And so this 8-day festival was established, called Hanukka, dedication. And so every year, starting on the 25th day of Kislev, the Jewish community recalls the twofold miracle: the enduring oil that actually sustained the light of the temple, the menorah, and the miraculous military victory. You see, friends, it's very incredible to think how God used a righteous priest and his 5 sons to actually arise to restore the righteousness of God again. They actually succeeded. A great, great army. They were outnumbered. There was in the natural no possibility of them actually defeating the Syrians. But they succeeded with a holy zeal, with a passion for God, to actually defeat this army that was greater than them and to force the Syrians out and to reestablish again the temple in honor of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they succeeded through the miraculous miracle of seeing God establish that oil for 8 days when it was only enough for 1 day. So you see, the Festival of Lights is a commemoration of the miraculous power of God to sustain his light in the nations and to overcome the powers of darkness that would seek to crush the very light of God in the Jewish people. Throughout the centuries, we have seen over and over again how nations and dictators and despots have sought to assimilate and to force the Jewish people to renounce their Jewishness and to renounce the very traditions and the very commands, the mitzvot, the commands of God that rendered them to be distinct from other nations. But they never succeeded, whether through the persecutions, whether through the Holocaust, whether through the pogroms, whether through the Inquisition, they never succeeded in extinguishing the light of the Jewish people. This is why Hanukka is a very powerful visual of the sustaining light of God through Israel, the Jewish people.
John chapter 8, verses 12 through 20. When Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." The Pharisees challenged him. "Here you are, appearing on your own witness. Your testimony is not valid." Jesus answered, "Even if I testify on my own behalf, my testimony is valid, for I know where I came from and where I am going. You have no idea where I come from or where I am going. You judge by human standards. I pass judgment on no one. But if I do judge, my decisions are true because I am not alone. I stand with the Father who sent me. In your own law it is written that the testimony of two witnesses is true. I am one who testifies for myself. My other witness is the Father who sent me." Then they asked him, "Where is your Father?" "You do not know me or my Father," Jesus replied. "If you knew me, you would know my Father also." He spoke these words while teaching in the temple courts near the palace where the offerings were put. Yet no one seized him because his hour had not yet come.
I'm privileged to be again with our friend Marty Shoub, and we want to talk today a little bit about Hanukka.
Okay.
All right, the Hanukka season is coming up, and as we've talked in a previous program, you grew up in a traditional Jewish home in Montreal. Yeah. Before we talk about Hanukka and its relationship to non-Jews and looking at it today, what was Hanukka like growing up for you?
Okay, well, let me just say this. It was not the Jewish equivalent of Christmas.
Yeah, so many people think that, eh? It's like...
No, I had one Gentile friend, and I remember going to his house, I think on Boxing Day, and seeing, the overwhelming amount of presents this guy received. I mean, we got presents at Hanukkah, and you're asking me to relate it as I was as a child, and presents are very, very high on my memories.
They're in the memories for sure.
But really, very, very low key, very, very much smaller scale than Christmas. It wasn't the Jewish equivalent of Christmas. So I think it's maybe becoming more of a competition that way.
Yeah.
Certainly my kids got a lot more Hanukkah presents from my parents than I ever did.
Well, so let's talk about Hanukkah in general, right? It's not one of these 7 feasts of the Lord that we read in Leviticus chapter 23, but we do read in the New Testament.
John chapter 10.
The Feast of Dedication.
That's right.
Hanukkah, dedication. What significance does Hanukkah hold for the Gentile believer or the non-Jewish believer in Jesus?
Well, it fits into the pattern where the Jewish people are under existential threat. We had this in Egypt, of course, and then there's the Purim story.
Purim story,
and then this is what sometimes we call the intertestamental period. After Alexander the Great's empire broke up and was split into 4, there were one center down in Egypt, one center in Syria. Israel's right in the middle,
Right.
and these two kingdoms were always fighting, and Israel was right in the thick of this. And there was one king in particular who tried to impose a uniform culture for all his subjects.
Right. Yeah, Hellenism.
Yes, so the idea was he was really trying to there was this threat to Jewish identity because he wanted all the Jewish people to conform to the Hellenistic culture and to just dispense with their Jewish identity. So then circumcision becomes illegal, and the Torah becomes a
Right.
prohibited book, and so on and so forth. So it was really a critical time, because I think for the miracle of the Jewish people's survival through the millennia is not so much that somebody was going to kill every last Jew, though there have been people who have attempted to do that, but
Right.
the even greater threat is the social pressure to assimilate
Yeah.
and just become like everybody else. And that, in a sense, is a much greater threat. And really, that was, the sword was behind it to some extent, but it was this great push for assimilation and just a denial for the Jewish people of their own calling and identity.
Right, and for those who don't know the story, it was all miraculous. So many people, they just think of the 8 days, the oil, and so much, but really that was just the final miracle. The miracle of the victory from like a 10-1 odds of Judah Maccabee's forces and against Antiochus's forces.
Yeah.
Conquering elephants, like it's like Lord of the Rings. You think, it's like you have that.
Well, again, it fits the pattern where we're surrounded, where it's against all odds.
David and
seemingly.
Goliath type of.
David and Goliath fits in that pattern.
For sure.
And, ultimately there is a great deliverance.
Yeah.
There is a victory against all odds. And I guess you asked the question, why is it significant for Gentiles? Well, try and picture this. If Antiochus had been successful and was able to have all his Jewish subjects assimilate into the Hellenistic culture completely, that would have been the end of the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And then there would have been no Jewish Messiah who
Yeshua
was
wouldn't have
born,
come.
about 150 years later.
Correct.
So, sometimes we like to say there'd be no Christmas if there wasn't a Hanukka beforehand.
Correct. Yeah. Oh, that's a good one there, Marty. Well, that's awesome. Friends, may you be blessed in this upcoming holiday season. Marty, thanks for joining us today.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Donna Holbrook, National Executive Director of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, Canada. Audrey Ruth Peer was one of our members who came to know about the work of the ICEJ in bringing comfort here, and she passed away as an only child and with no children of her own. She had two regrets in her life. One was that she didn't have children, and the other one that she never came to the land of Israel. So when she passed away, she left an estate. I shared it with her friend Pat, who knew her for over 60 years. And I said, Pat, what do you think Audrey would like, how we use her funds? So music was important to her. Children also important to her. And so we undertook the fund and we divided it 4 ways equally. And it went to a petting zoo for children, for orphan boys near Tel Aviv. It also went to build 2 new music rooms at Bet Yosef up at Haifa, which is a very large community center. We also helped to complete a playground for another orphanage to the south of Israel. And then it enabled us to restore our scholarship for Christian young adults. And even though she was never in Israel, her name is in the land on those 3 projects, and it continued for 5 years on our Canadian scholarship for Christian leaders who have never been to Israel, who are in the age group of 17 to 30. Would you consider being a shomer, keeper of Israel, in your state giving? And that leaves a wonderful legacy here in Israel.
We conclude our program today with some sights and sounds within Israel. Thank you for joining us today, and be sure to visit our website at www.icejcanada.tv or call us at 1-866-324-9133. And for our Canadian residents, be sure to ask for your free Canada-Israel pin. Through your contributions to ICEJ Canada, you can participate by giving to Haifa Home for Holocaust Survivors, Women at Risk Red Carpet Project, Operation Life Shield Bomb-Proof Shelters, Mentoring Programs, Aliyah Support, Children's Projects, Israel in Crisis, Israel Aid, Magan David Adam Emergency Services, Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, Scholarships for Young Adult Leaders, ICEJ Canada Media Fund, Gift Estate Securities Fund.